A friend called me up the other day panicking. He said, "Patrick, I used the 4% rule this morning to see if I've saved enough for retirement, and I'm scared that I haven't." Now, my friend is already 60 years old, so that explains why he was stressed out. He said, "I thought we were doing great. Combined, we make $145,000 a year, so if I divide that by 4%, that comes out to over $3.6 million. Now, we have $1.5 million, and I was happy about that, but now I'm freaking out. If I need $3.6 million, I'll never be able to retire." So I tell him, I've got good news for you. First off, the 4% rule isn't really a rule at all. At best, it's a rule of thumb. So based on what you just told me, my guess is that you don't need anything close to $3.6 million to retire. So my buddy took a deep breath, but I could tell he was still stressed. He was probably going to need a little bit more convincing. So let's walk through what an average middle-class couple like my buddy and his wife would need in their accounts today to know if they're on track for retirement. Now first, let's get the boring part out of the way. Based on research from the Pew Center and data from the 2020 census, a middle-class income in the U.S. falls somewhere between roughly $75,000 a year and $150,000 a year. But that's income, not expenses. When I talk with my clients about retirement, I really don't care how much they make. I care more about how much they save and spend. So I'll walk through these numbers with my buddy. Their salary combined is $145,000 a year, but 10% is immediately going into their 401ks, which of course saves them money on their taxes. And they're also putting away around 5% of their total income into a brokerage account. So after all their savings and taxes, they're really only bringing home around $87,000 a year. So when my buddy used the 4% rule on their total pre-tax income of $145,000, he was vastly overestimating how much they actually spend in a year. In reality, they're only spending about 60% of that. So if my friend wanted to use the 4% rule on their net income of $87,000 a year, that would come out to around $2.2 million. But I also know that that's overestimating what he would probably need as well, because he's not factoring in Social Security income. At some point, you just have to run the numbers. And that's why, as a financial professional, I have all these great software programs that will allow us to model out his retirement much better than just a back-of-the-napkin calculation. So part of that is to map out our cash flows in retirement and run a statistical analysis on how these scenarios would play out. This is called a Monte Carlo probability analysis. And that analysis ends up looking something like this. Do you see the light blue cone here? The light blue cone shows us two standard deviations from the mean. It basically represents 90% of all possible scenarios in this analysis. If our hypothetical retiree in this case were to find themselves at the edges of the light blue cone, then something would have had to have gone really wrong or really right for them. They'd had to have some incredible luck one way or the other. So when I look at these analyses, I'm much more interested in the dark blue cone, which represents the most likely 50%, and I'm really happy that this middle cone here, in this case, never reaches zero. If this analysis tells me that a client has a 70 to 90% chance of making it through retirement without running out of money, I'm a happy camper. But every once in a while, an analysis will look something like this. Do you see how the dark blue cone hits zero in the future? And how the middle line, which represents the mean case, dips farther into their retirement? This is telling me that they're going to be dipping too much into their principal perhaps, and that our conversation needs to shift more towards lowering their retirement expenses a little bit. So when it comes to middle-class Americans like my buddy and his wife, how much would they need in their accounts today to retire and still spend what they're spending today? You know, they live a great life, but they're not spending like crazy people either. If my buddy and his wife want to retire at age 62 in 2 years, they really should have around $1.6 million saved up today. So they're close. If they were clients, I'd want to dive into some of their cash flow details to be a little bit more comfortable. But if they wait and retire at age 65, they're way ahead of the $1.26 million that they would need today to make that happen. And if they wanted to retire at 70, then they're fine. So what's the minimum that someone in my buddy's situation would need to be comfortable retiring? For a 90% chance of success, they need around $2.1 million today. To retire at 65, they're a bit short, and if they wait until 70, they've got plenty. But remember, this analysis is just a tool in our toolbox. A 90% probability may end up meaning that my buddy and his wife don't actually enjoy much of the money that they've worked so hard to save. It's great to get an A on the test, but would you really be upset if you got a B? Okay, if you were an overachiever like I was, maybe you would be a little upset at a B, but in terms of this analysis, I think a B is really the sweet spot here. So how much would they need to have saved today to have an 80% probability of success according to this analysis? Well, retiring at 62 might still be a stretch for them, but they were looking real good for age 65. And again, they have plenty if they want to delay until age 70. After walking through some of these numbers, my buddy finally calmed down, thanked me, and told me that beers were on him next time we got together. And I told him that I'm here for him whenever he's ready to stop trying to do all of this himself. Financial planning is a process, not a project. Everything's constantly changing, so while this snapshot in time might paint a rosy picture for their retirement, we need to look at this at least once a year to know if we need to make any course corrections. But if you're just overworked and want to retire at 60, I totally get it. Check out this video where I explain how much you might need. I'll see you there.